Hello. Uh, am I talking to uh, Simon and John?
Hi, Simon here from ULI.
Hello.
Hi, Konstantin.
Good
Hello.
afternoon. Afternoon.
How are
Good to
you?
see you.
So, we are connected already with Mr. Simon Chin, Vice President, Research and Advisory Services of Urban and Land Institute Europe, and Mr. John Law, Director of Lead for Cities and Communities, U.S. Green Building Council. Is this correct? Yes. Hello. Now I can see you. Forgive me before I couldn't see you. So, um, we're having a huge discussion here concerning Thessaloniki mainly, but unfortunately about the cities in general, Greek cities in general. And I have heard several people talking about the future, about the sustainability. So I would like to hear from you two first a general discussion about these from your fields of expertise about how we can do our cities in the future resilient. Although, however, I have a problem in my head that I would like to have also from your point of view, uh, your ideas. In Greece, we have a major problem demographically. So, making better cities destroys the the other areas, let's say, because people wants to go to the cities, obviously. But what happens to the rest of Greece, which has the problem? I'll give you a number which I consider very important. 4% of Greeks, excuse me, 50% of Greeks live at the 4% of the whole area of Greece. So I would like to hear about sustainability for the cities, but I am interested also about sustainability for the country. So I would like to hear. Let's start. Let's say with Mr. Chin, which since he's the first in this in our program.
Thank you, Konstantinos, and a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, albeit virtually, but appreciate you speaking with us. So just a bit of context and maybe a bit of background about the Urban Land Institute, because I appreciate there may be people in the room that aren't familiar with the Urban Land Institute. So the Urban Land Institute is a global member-driven organization of professionals that work in the real estate and built environment sectors that are focused on shaping the future of cities and having a transformative impact in urban areas globally. We're a network of around 50,000 members globally across North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. And really, the Institute works as a kind of education and research institute for shaping the future of cities. And as you said, Konstantinos, I think you set some of the scene there with, and actually, I wanted to kind of build on that really in terms of some maybe a bit of background and context from the statistics to help shape our conversation before I pass on to John. So, why do cities matter fundamentally? So, firstly, if you look at, as you mentioned, I mean, the Greek situation is interesting there in terms of the population that live in urban areas, in terms of the land mass. If you look at it globally, urban areas account for only around 2 to 3% of the land surface area globally. However, they're home to around 60% of the global population. And this proportion is even higher in some countries. So, for example, in Greece, I think over 80% of the population live in urban areas. And the activity that takes place in those urban areas accounts for around 80% of global GDP. And that activity also causes around 70% of consumption related carbon emissions. So linking this in with the broader theme of the conference today, urban resilience and the future for future-ready cities. Why do cities matter? That fundamentally they matter because this is where society lives. This is where economic output is derived, and they have massive environmental impact. Now, that's not to say that that's a bad thing, that this amount of activity happens and the environmental impact is an externality of that economic activity that happens in cities. I think, as you say, Konstantinos, the challenge is to look at how we can deal or make cities more sustainable, but then also not have that negative impact on the broader environment. And there's a growing theme and focus now around kind of nature positive solutions for cities. Biodiversity, we had a kind of biodiversity COP happen in Cali in Colombia a few weeks ago. So this is definitely an interesting theme. But maybe I'll kind of pause there and we can bring John in and then broaden up this broader conversation about sustainability in cities.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. We can hear John Law. John?
Sure. Thank you again, Simon and Konstantinos. Great to be here. So just by way of introduction quickly, I am John Law. I am based in Chicago, working for the U.S. Green Building Council. I'm the director of LEED for Cities and Communities for that organization. We run the LEED program, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Hopefully you've at least heard of that. We certify buildings, cities, and communities. Prior to that, I spent most of my career working as an urban planner and designer, so I'm also bringing some design and public sector experience as well. But I think Simon did a great job summarizing why cities matter and the efficiencies and opportunities we have to make them more sustainable. As I think about sort of the topic session and ecosystem resilience and human well-being, for me, each of these are huge topics, right? How we can make our both cities more sustainable from an ecological standpoint as well as a human health standpoint. What's really interesting to me is where these two things intersect and how we can use cities to simultaneously make our ecosystem more resilient, more sustainable, longer enduring, and as well as improve human health. And what Simon started alluding to, which is sort of regenerative and nature-based design solutions, I think is a huge part of that. As we start to look at our cities, and the need for all the infrastructure that comes with these dense urban areas, I think we need to make them serve more than just one purpose. Thinking about things like roads, can they do more than just move cars and help with our transportation supplies? Can they also work with water? Can they work on improving human health by promoting walkability and bikeability? Thinking about larger infrastructure aspects like levees and seawalls. There's been for centuries been the tradition of just trying to sort of combat nature and build resistant and sort of durable infrastructure that pushes against nature. Can we find ways to rethink that going forward and redesigning our infrastructure to be adaptable with nature, to create opportunities for green space within our cities, and really work in balance with nature and supplying both the natural systems that we need, more opportunities for carbon sequestration and nature opportunities, while serving the function they need from a practical standpoint as this sort of piece of urban infrastructure. Just thinking back, coming out of school, learning architecture and urban planning, we're taught to study all these different cities globally, beautiful historic cities like Thessaloniki and other areas around the world, to look at patterns of urban density, patterns of street grid, patterns of land use. And it's, as I started to practice in my own career, it dawned on me that I spent a lot of time working in the Middle East and Asia designing new cities from scratch, which is an interesting opportunity to sort of think with a blank slate and how you would do that. And for me, that's where I sort of realized that going forward, the future of cities has to be much more in balance with nature. We have to sort of create a new form of urbanism, which can be challenging in historic cities, but finding ways to integrate nature into the cities in a more meaningful way, even whether it's sort of developing large open space preserves or small interventions on streetscapes and rooftops. But I think I'll pause there. I have some thoughts too on just sort of the notion of what you were getting at, with the notion of urban sprawl and the compactness of our cities. I think what Simon was saying about the amount of population that we do host in our urban areas is the numbers are shocking, or they're sort of alarming. Not alarming, they're surprising. But it's in a way it's a very positive thing that we can create so much of our economic and human capital in these relatively small footprints and allow these sort of ex-urban and suburban areas to serve other ecological functions.
So I would like to, since I asked you, John, talking about nature and how we should create more nature in the cities. Does do cars negate nature, Simon? So should we take them out? Someone earlier said, let's have the cars out of the waterfront of Thessaloniki, which is
Yeah,
amazing. And people are walking there. So you have a
yeah.
series of cafes and cafeterias because you're looking at the city at the sea. You have cars and people walking at the pavement, at the sidewalk, as you say in the States. So should we take the cars out? Can we do that?
Well, this is a growing trend globally. We see it in many cities around the world, this whole kind of people first approach to planning, as kind of John alluded to, going back to the architectural principles or urban planning. Like, it is really kind of, I think from the 1950s onwards, we saw car-centric planning and cities become more dominant, and this is very noticeable in certain North American cities, for example. But interestingly, I mean, just this case, for example, the waterfront, this is a very common theme we see. So at the Urban Land Institute, we engage with a lot of cities and mayors and local authorities globally. And I'll give you an example. We've just done some work last year with the city of Frankfurt in Germany, and they have an exact case there. It's not a seafront; it's a riverfront. So the River Main, which goes through the center of the city, the the city authorities are looking to completely revitalize that area. The north bank of that river front road is very congested. It's highly polluted, full of cars, like you say, either parked or transversing through that street. They came to the Urban Land Institute to get advice, really, for best approaches in terms of revitalizing that and making it people first. Also, bike friendly as well, multimodal transport, but really emphasizing that kind of pedestrian centric approach to a redesign of that street. We did work with the city. We brought experts from our Urban Land Institute network that came on, former mayor of Barcelona, who kind of gave some advice there about what they've done in Barcelona, certain streets there with pedestrianization, and provided recommendations drawing on kind of global examples we've seen. I mean, John may have examples from the US. I mean, Times Square is a great example, right? In New York, we've seen really good instances of kind of changing these quite car-centric, heavily vehicle places into more pedestrian-centric places. I would say in that case for the kind of coastal waterfront place, it's a prime example of a place that should be pedestrians should be prioritized. It is a great place where you can combine, as we were talking about there, that kind of green and blue infrastructure elements of a city. So incorporating some of that nature components that we were talking about, along with the kind of blue water infrastructure there that is really important and fundamental for a lot of cities. And increasingly, a lot of this is linked to climate adaptation measures to deal with increasing kind of climate risks or physical climate risks that we see happening in cities globally. So you can really kind of build that infrastructure to adapt to increased threats, whether it be kind of storm surges or increasing the vegetation there that can deal with water runoff when we have extreme kind of downpours of water. The nature solutions as well, in terms of more greenery, more trees, it's proven to show that they also lower the kind of average surface temperature in urban locations, which combat that urban heat island effect. So they can deal with measures that cause extreme heat and that kind of uncomfortable places. So I think it's a definite worthwhile case pursuing, and really it's about emphasizing it to the city authorities and the government to say this is what the citizens of the city want. It's wanted often by the people that live in the city, and it's also a massive attractive factor for bringing in tourist visitors and then foreign direct investment to cities. So that's my kind of long-winded answer to that approach, but it's definite a big focus we see happening in cities globally at the moment.
I will stick a little bit more to that. And I'll talk out of a personal experience. However, I think I can talk for almost all the cities in Greece, since I heard you, Simon, saying that they were created in the 70s with in being car centric. I live in Paleofaliro, and I am the president of the city council. And we have a problem from time to time, a discussion of how we shape our sidewalks, because they are narrow and they have a tree planted in the middle. So we have 1 foot on the one side free and 1 foot on the other side free, or 2 feet, let's say. And this means that a wheelchair cannot pass from there, and a mother with a stroller, a baby stroller, cannot pass from there, or an elder person with an electric vehicle with a 3 tricycle cannot pass from there. So what do? Do we cut the trees, or we do not cut the trees, but we know that that the pavements are inaccessible from a big portion of the residents? John?
Sure. Tapping into my design roots here, this is great. So I think it's about finding balance in those cases. It sort of ties into your earlier question about do you take the cars out or not? I think you have to look holistically at the city and find the right opportunities on where to do that strategically. So places like the waterfront, places like narrow roads that have higher pedestrian usage. Many cars all over the world, or many cities struggle with the balance of cars and humans. They're not sort of conducive to each other in many cases. But few cities have said we're not going to do anything, we're not going to keep any cars. So how do we find that balance? I would ask you in that case, what happens outside of the curb, right? What's happening in the roadway next to it? Is there an opportunity to remove on-street parking or narrow the roadways to make it a one-way road and expand your sidewalk to improve accessibility and allow for people in wheelchairs and all mobility cases to get by there while maintaining a landscape?
At that point, money comes as an issue. When you say
Sure.
You narrow the street, you widen the sidewalk, money comes as an issue immediately.
It does. It does. Of course, anytime you're working with hardscape and infrastructure, it definitely gets costly. But I think you have to. This is where my role at USGBC gets more into measuring sustainability and how we measure it. I think we have to look. We need to start measuring performance beyond GDP, beyond hard cost of investment, and looking at either longer payback periods or starting to measure what we call sort of ecological or nature services, things that nature, improved health, have on the economics of a city in the longer term, right?
Okay.
Getting people out of their cars.
And then I'll cut you there. Yeah. And then when you start thinking long term, then it comes the discussion about elections, that they're coming faster than the long term. Yeah. Okay. Continue, John.
It is. It's a fair point. I think there's always election pressure to do something quickly and fast, right, to have impact. But I think it is time for our politicians and policymakers to understand what it is to measure the impacts of health, right? Getting people out of their cars, on the streets, walking, being more active, away from the emissions, in cooler environments with trees, has a massive economic impact as well as just social benefit. So I do think there's these trade-offs to be made that are not easy decisions, and I'm not the one that has to face the constituents to do that, but it's a challenge. And Simon, feel free to chime in.
So I'll put a final question for both. Should we have, and how can we organize, or how long can we have a plan that will cover everything? So we have to discuss it now, take a decision now, decide what we want to do. But what kind of plan is this? Is 10 years, 15 years, Simon?
Are you speaking specifically for that kind of street intervention, or
no? I'm talking about having a plan about a city becoming more sustainable, becoming more green. Sure. I mean, I heard a few, let's say, some hours ago, the mayor of Thessaloniki saying my goal for the next 5 years is to have from 40,000 trees to have 100,000 trees and double the green free areas of the city. Can we do that in 5? Can you do something like that in 5 years? Is it enough time?
I never like putting timeframes on these things because it's often then you're kind of pinning yourself to failure, in my view. But it's good to have ambition and it's good to set goals, I would say. and have a kind of line of sight of where you want to move. In terms of setting those kind of priorities, I think, as John said, you need to look at this at a kind of city scale level, at a functional level, like how is the city being used in terms of from an economic, social, and demographic perspective, and all those factors will play out in terms of the sustainability aspects of that. The city plan needs to be done at this kind of scale as well, because ultimately the end users, the people that live and come to the city, don't live in these kind of administrative boundary, or don't, in their mindset, they don't have these administrative boundaries. So it does require that collaboration between different local authorities and different municipalities, where there's often a kind of a political divide. Granted, I know that's not always easy because it gets into different politics, different cycles of election, but ultimately with an overviewing or overarching kind of strategic plan that encompasses economic, social, and environmental components for the future of the city, if that is all aligned and has this vision and direction of travel over, you know, a time frame, whether it be 10, 20 years, there needs that to be very cohesive and set in place, which will help ultimately drive the kind of more positive, you know, future for our cities and what's going on. One thing I just wanted to touch upon on the previous question, the cost is always obviously an implication here, and that kind of trade-off in terms of doing something offsetting the costs. We know like a lot of cities and local authorities globally are under pressure in terms of their budgets and the kind of fiscal elements that they're dealing with. But some of the interventions that John was alluding to, I think could be done at a kind of more low-cost kind of approach, whether it be there's certain guerrilla kind of urban tactics where, as John said there, rather than putting expensive kind of roadworks in, you could just put, you know, planters. We've seen that in some cities. It happened during the pandemic when there were restrictions in place in terms of having distances between people. That was an issue with these pavements. Globally, many cities had very narrow, so it was impossible to have that kind of 2-meter distance. So what cities did was put temporary kind of planters in the road, so it blocks out, you know, that off-street parking. It widens the pavement. And then we've seen in some instances now that has become permanent. And then once the municipalities build up the budget, they can actually make that a permanent place in terms of that change, that urban change at a street level. So just something I wanted to add in on that theme or that topic.
So thank you very much, John. You have 30 seconds, 1 minute to sum up.
Sure, yeah. Well, since you asked about sort of politics and timelines, I think obviously in the U.S. facing some news recently on our own political future. I applaud the mayor of Thessaloniki. I think that's what's important, is that whatever the goal or the timeline, we have to work urgently. And I think that the best impact is going to happen at the local government level. I think we can really transform our cities with strong political leadership. Things can be done quickly. We've seen the mayor of New York, Bloomberg, from a decade ago, plant 1 million trees in 4 years. I think with the right political will and the right motivation, absolutely things can happen quickly, and they need to, if we're going to sort of meet our global imperative of making major impact by 2050. So I applaud the city for taking that ambition.
I thank you both. Thank you very much. It was Mr. Simon Chin, Vice President of Research and Advisory Service on Urban and Land Institute Europe, and John Law, Director of Lead for Cities and Communities in the U.S. Green Building Council. Thank you very much, both. Have a nice day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.